Have you ever noticed that the people who demand respect the loudest are usually the people who receive the least of it? Think about that for a second. We've all met that person. They interrupt everyone. They dominate every conversation. They speak with certainty about things they barely understand. They walk into a room trying to prove they're important. And somehow, despite all that effort, nobody actually respects them. Now think about someone else. Someone who walks into a room and doesn't need to announce their presence. They don't raise their voice. They don't fight for attention. They don't try to impress anyone. Yet somehow everyone listens when they speak. What's the difference? Because if you're anything like most people, you've probably been stuck somewhere in the middle. You don't want to be aggressive. You don't want to be arrogant. You don't want to become one of those people who bulldoze others just to feel powerful. But you also don't want to be ignored. You don't want people talking over you in meetings. You don't want your opinions dismissed. You don't want to constantly replay conversations in your head thinking, why didn't I say something? And here's the truth that changed everything for me. Respect is not something you force, it's something you signal. I learned this lesson in one of the most uncomfortable moments of my life. Years ago, I was at an event surrounded by people who were far more successful than me. Entrepreneurs, speakers, executives, people who seemed to have life figured out. I remember standing there, holding a drink, trying desperately to sound intelligent. Every time someone spoke, I felt this pressure to prove myself. I'd jump into conversations too quickly, I'd add stories that nobody asked for, I'd try to demonstrate that I belonged there. And the more I tried to earn respect, the less respect I felt. Then I noticed someone across the room. He wasn't the loudest person there. He wasn't telling impressive stories. He wasn't dominating the conversation. In fact, he was speaking less than almost everyone else. But every time he opened his mouth, the entire group listened. I became obsessed. What was he doing that I wasn't? The answer wasn't what he said. It was how he carried himself before he ever spoke. And that leads to the first lesson. The strongest people don't rush. Have you ever noticed how insecurity feels urgent? When you're afraid of being ignored, you speak faster. When you're afraid of looking stupid, you explain more. When you're afraid of losing status, you defend yourself immediately. Urgency is often insecurity wearing a disguise. Confidence moves differently. Imagine watching two people walk through an airport. One person is sprinting, looking around frantically, checking every sign, apologizing as they bump into people. The other person walks calmly, slowly, like they know exactly where they're going. Who looks more in control? Now here's the funny part. The second person might actually be lost, but because they aren't broadcasting panic, everyone assumes competence. The same thing happens in conversation. When someone challenges your opinion, do you rush to justify yourself? When there's a silence, do you rush to fill it? When someone interrupts you, do you immediately fight to get your words back? Try this instead. Slow down. Pause before answering. Take a breath before responding. Not because it's a technique, because you're communicating something deeper. You're communicating that you don't need to fight for your place in the conversation. And people respect those who don't appear desperate for approval. The next lesson is one that changed the way I interact with everyone. Stop trying to win every interaction. This sounds strange because we're taught the opposite. Win the argument, win the negotiation, win the debate. But have you ever met someone who wins every argument? They're exhausting. Nobody leaves a conversation thinking, wow, I respect that person because they proved me wrong 17 times. I remember having dinner with a friend years ago. We were discussing a topic we completely disagreed on. I came armed with facts, statistics, examples. I was ready, and I won, at least technically. I dismantled every point he made. I explained why my position was more logical. I walked away feeling victorious. Then I realized something. He didn't respect me more afterward. He respected me less, because respect isn't created when you make someone feel small. It's created when you make someone feel seen. The most respected people I've ever met have a strange superpower. They don't need to be right all the time. Think about how powerful that is. Imagine someone says something you disagree with. Instead of immediately correcting them, you ask, "That's interesting. How did you come to that conclusion?" Do you know what happens? People lower their defenses. They feel heard. And paradoxically, when people don't feel attacked, they're far more likely to respect your perspective. The goal isn't to win the moment. The goal is to earn long-term influence, because influence lasts longer than victory. Now, there's another lesson that nobody talks about enough. You teach people how to treat you. I know that sounds harsh, but think about your own life. Have you ever had that friend who constantly cancels plans at the last minute? Or that coworker who always dumps their responsibilities on you? Or that person who interrupts you every single time you speak? Here's the difficult question. How many times did you allow it before it became a pattern? I used to think being nice meant saying yes, being accommodating, being available, being understanding, until one day I realized something painful. People weren't respecting my kindness. They were depending on my lack of boundaries. And there's a huge difference. Imagine your time, attention, and energy are like the front door of your house. Would you leave your front door open 24 hours a day and then act surprised when people walk in whenever they want? Of course not. Yet that's exactly what many of us do emotionally. We say yes when we want to say no. We laugh when we're uncomfortable. We apologize when we've done nothing wrong. And then we wonder why people don't respect us. Respect requires boundaries, not angry boundaries, not aggressive boundaries, clear boundaries, simple boundaries. I can't do that. I disagree. That doesn't work for me. Do you know what's fascinating? The first time you set a boundary, some people will be uncomfortable, not because you're doing something wrong, because you're changing the rules of a game they've become comfortable playing. And that discomfort often tricks us into believing we've made a mistake. You haven't. You've simply started teaching people that your needs matter too. Now, let me tell you the lesson that took me the longest to understand. Your voice matters more than your words. Have you ever listened to someone say something incredibly intelligent but nobody paid attention? Then someone else says something simple and everyone suddenly leans in? Why? Because communication isn't just information, it's energy. I remember giving presentations early in my career where I'd obsess over every word, I'd rehearse endlessly, I'd memorize everything, and then I'd stand up and deliver it with the energy of someone apologizing for existing. Guess what happened? Nobody remembered a thing I said. Then one day, a mentor gave me feedback I'll never forget. He said, "You sound like you're asking permission to speak." That sentence hit me like a truck, because he was right. I wasn't speaking to communicate. I was speaking to avoid judgment, and people can feel that. The way you speak tells people how to perceive you. If you speak as though your ideas have value, people assume they do. If you speak as though you're uncertain, people begin to doubt you before you've even finished your sentence. This doesn't mean becoming louder. It means becoming more intentional. Finish your sentences. Avoid turning every statement into a question. Allow silence to exist. Trust that you deserve to occupy space, because you do. And finally, here's what I believe is the deepest secret of all. People respect people who respect themselves, not in a narcissistic way, not in an arrogant way, in a peaceful way. Think about the people you admire most. Are they constantly seeking validation? Do they spend all their time proving their worth? Or do they carry themselves with a quiet certainty? That certainty comes from an internal decision, a decision that says, my value is not up for negotiation. For years, I thought confidence came after success, after achievement, after external validation, but I had it backward. Confidence comes from keeping promises to yourself. It's built every time you speak up when it's uncomfortable, every time you set a boundary, every time you stop apologizing for taking up space, every time you act as though your voice matters. Because it does. And here's the irony. The moment you stop chasing respect, you become more worthy of it. The moment you stop trying to convince everyone you're important, people start feeling your importance. The moment you stop performing confidence and start practicing self-respect, everything changes. So if you've spent years trying to be liked by everyone, trying not to upset anyone, trying to avoid conflict at all costs, I want you to remember this. Respect and aggression are not the same thing. Aggression says, I matter more than you. Weakness says, you matter more than me. Respect says, we both matter. And the people who command the deepest respect in life are not the loudest, the toughest, or the most intimidating. They're the people who have learned one simple truth. You never have to fight for the space that already belongs to you.